Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. In this video I'd like to show you how I sow my carrots and my parsnips. So this is a plot that I prepared a few days ago. It's been well dug over. I'll put a link into the iCard at the top right of the screen so you can have a look at how I prepared the soil. Basically it was well dug over, take out any large objects. I've given this really good soak of water recently as well, so it's nice and damp. That's quite important with carrots because they're very small seeds, and if they dry out at all when they just start germinating, they'll quite easily die off. So you need to make sure that they're well watered beforehand. And if you water them afterwards, once they're in the soil, they're such small seeds, there's a real risk that they could get washed away. So it's good to get it watered beforehand. So I'm just now going to rake this over, because often when you've had it left the soil for a while, a few clumps appear, or a few stones such as this one here suddenly make an appearance. So I'm going to go ahead now, give it a rake, take off any larger material, and then start sowing. So there's going to be two types of carrots I'll be growing in this plot, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to do quite wide rows of the Autumn King carrot. This is this one here. This is a late maturing carrot, get a very high yield, really big carrot roots, but it takes a long time to mature. So we're harvesting right at the end of summer, and then I'm going to do rows of this just over 30 centimeters wide. But in between those rows I'm going to be planting Amsterdam forcing 3 carrots. These are really fast maturing carrots. They mature in a couple of months. They will give us a nice crop of baby carrots, and the idea is, because these take a long time to mature, there's going to be quite a lot of space in between the plants. So we're going to fill that space with these carrots. When these are ready to harvesting, they'll be quite congested with the 2 carrots in a small space. We'll remove these ones, and as these are harvested, that'll give more space for the larger autumn harvesting carrots to get to full size and grow for the rest of the summer. If there's still a lot of space at that time of harvesting, we will re-sow some of these, but I suspect they'll be quite crammed by then, and these will need the space, so we'll just leave them as empty rows in between these. So that's why I'll be sowing the carrots so closely together. And when it comes to sowing carrots, you really want to make sure you don't throw them down the ground. You want it nice and loose. It's not too much of an issue here because I've got sandy soils, but if you have a clay soil, something that's quite heavy, then you don't want to put any pressure on it. So I'm going to be using a plank of wood, a wide plank of wood. If I need to walk in the plot, I'll walk on that. That will mean that I won't be compacting it quite as much. And I'm going to make some nice straight rows, approximately 30 centimeters wide, just slightly wider than 30 centimeters. And then in between the rows, I'll be sowing the fast growing Amsterdam forcing 3 carrot. So that's my first row marked out. Now the carrots don't like being planted very deep because they're very small seeds. But if you just sow them on the surface, you have a slight risk there of them drying out a bit quicker. So I'm going to make a very shallow trough using the end of the rake here. I'm just going to go along. I only want it about 1 centimeter or 2 deep, so I'm just going to do it just to the side of the string here. Just trying not to move the string too much, otherwise I'm not going to get a nice straight line. And I'm just really trying to make it very shallow, because if it's too deep, then the seeds will struggle to grow through the soil and they won't germinate properly. But if it's too shallow, what will happen is the carrots will dry out too quickly. So that's the first row now complete. Using a measuring stick, I'm just going to measure the second row for the autumn late carrots. Same again, I'm just going to make a very narrow trough to sow the carrots in. That's the kind of spacing you want for most carrots, about 30 centimeters or a foot. That gives enough space for the carrots to mature nicely. But as I say, I'm wanting to try and get a nice early crop of small baby carrots as well. So I'm going to implant that in the middle of those with another row, and that will give me the other early cropping carrots, which they can then harvest first thing in the year. So that's my first 3 rows set up. I'm now going to do this repeating pattern for the rest of them, but first of all I'm going to get these sown just before the wind starts blowing it around and before I start accidentally walking on it, because I'll need to walk on some of this probably to reach the other rows. So one of the tricky elements of sowing carrots is the seeds. They're very, very tiny. It's very easy to put lots in a small area, then miss sections as well because they're so small. And also the seeds have a very bad shelf life. So if you have old carrot seeds that are 2 or 3 years old from the shops, they're probably not going to be viable anymore. You'll need to replace them. So it's good to make sure you got a new packet of seeds every year if you can. That way you get good germination. I'll just show you now just how small these seeds are. They are a bit almost like dust, about the size of a caraway seed, something like that. So they're quite small, so you want to be quite sparing with them and just slowly scatter them along. It's quite easy, as I say, just to scatter lots in a small area with them being such small seeds, but you want to try and keep them evenly spaced out if you can. So I'm just going to go along this row now. These are the late autumn ones, and these are going to give the large carrots at the end of the year. So now that I've sown the main rows, I'm now going to go in between with the fast maturing Amsterdam variety of carrot. As I say, these will give us a nice quick crop of carrots early on in the year when it's far too early for the other ones to be ready. These one can be sown slightly thicker because we're going to be eating these as baby carrots, so they can grow quite a lot closer together. It's not a problem. But with both types of carrots, I will be thinning them out. So now that the rows are sown, I need to put in some seed labels to make sure I don't mix them up, because I don't want to accidentally harvest the wrong plants, otherwise we won't get the maximum yield. So now I need to gently cover in the troughs that I created earlier. I just go along with the end of the rake and I just kind of pull backwards, and that normally does quite a good job of covering them up. I only want them to be about 1 centimetre deep, so that's probably just about 1/3 of an inch, something like that. And this makes sure that they're damp enough and they're not going to dry out too quickly. But I'll also be putting planks of wood on top of these because it's quite dry this spring at the moment. We've had quite a dry spring and there's not much rain forecast, and I suspect that we're going to have problems keeping this watered. All it takes is a couple of dry days when the seeds are just at the critical stage of putting out their first roots, and you can lose your whole crop because the seedlings will just dry up and die. So I'm going to be very careful to make sure they're well watered, and putting a plank of wood over the top helps to trap the moisture in. So with the planks of wood, I will be keeping them, I'll be keeping an eye on them. So within about a week of putting the wood on, I need to start checking if the seeds are germinating, and as soon as I see some of the seedlings coming up and germinating, I'll be taking the planks away so that they aren't completely smothered and that they have good space to grow. And I'm doing these carrots in sections because if you sow the whole lot, it's quite likely that you'll forget where the rows are. You won't be able to see them as the soil settles down, and you really want to make sure that the planks are directly above the seedlings so that they don't dry out at all. I did water the soil a few days prior to this to make sure that it was nice and damp, and once the planks are on, I'll also give this a watering again with a hose pipe to make sure that the soil stays damp. So in this vegetable patch in particular, we've added a lot of compost over the years, so the soil level's actually been raised. So I'm having to use some shorter planks of wood here, as the longer ones were sticking far too high above the soil. But the plank doesn't have to be in complete contact with the soil the whole time. As long as it's generally covering it, stopping the strong sunshine and the wind, that will help a lot to stop the soil drying out too fast. So that's the carrot lines all sown out now. I've also put in a couple of larger stakes. At the end of each row I have labelled individual rows with small labels, but I made some slightly larger, nicer ones for the end row, so it's easier to see what carrots there are without having to bend down. At some point it would be nice, I think, to make more of these. I made these out of driftwood. I just got a plane down one side of it, then sanded it with a sandpaper, and then wrote on it. It was interesting to see the hardwood here came up much better than the softwood. The softwood can absorb the permanent marker, whereas the hardwood, it didn't soak in as much, it left a nice crisp Chris finished the writing. So I might make some more of them in the future in the garden. I might make a video as that as well. But that's it for the carrot sowing. I now need to give this a good soak, leave it for about a week, then start looking underneath the planks of wood every single day to make sure they're not starting to germinate. And as soon as they start germinating, I need to then take the planks of wood off. Now when it comes to weeding, carrots are really susceptible to being smothered by other weeds, especially when they're young, because carrots take quite a while to germinate. They can take 2 or 3 weeks sometimes to germinate, and also the carrots, when they start to grow, they're very small seeds, so they come up and they're very small plants, and they grow quite slowly to begin with, so the weeds can quickly overtake them and swamp them. So I need to be quite careful, and I need to take out any of the weeds that I can as they appear. Once the carrots are big enough, I'll be probably mulching this site and keeping the weeds down with mulch until the carrots come up a bit bigger. I can't put mulch in because the mulch will just smother the carrots. Another big problem with the carrots is carrot root fly. So this garden isn't too bad for it, but we have had some carrot root fly in the past. So what that is the small insect, that's a small type of fly. It lands on the carrot, it then lays its eggs, and the eggs hatch, and there's little maggots that then eat the roots of the carrot, and you just leave lots of little holes in the carrot, and in bad cases it can completely kill the carrot and ruin your harvest. So what I'm going to be doing later in the season is putting on a very fine mesh over the top of it to stop any of the carrot root fly from getting in. That should deal with most of the risk of the carrot root fly from coming in and laying their eggs on the carrots. The biggest problem for it is when the carrots are quite young. During springtime, that's when the carrot root fly is most active, but it has several generations through the year, so it will keep active for most of the summer. And they find the plant by the smell of the carrot, so you can interplant carrots with other strong smelling plants to try and hide the scent of the carrot, and that will help with the carrot root fly. So another time that it's a big problem is when you're thinning the carrots, because when you thin the carrots you damage the foliage, and that releases even more of the smell. So that's a really prime time for the carrot root fly to come, so you have to be particularly careful when you're thinning the plants. So my next days now is the parsnips. That's just around here. What I've got is a small triangle here where the parsnips will go. This wider section, I don't know if it's showing in the camera, where I put a lot of compost, that's actually going to be for runner beans. So it's just a small section here for the parsnips. And I'm going to sow them slightly differently because the seeds on parsnips are quite a lot larger. So I'm going to be doing the same here with the parsnip plot. I'm going to give it a fine rake over, make sure there's no large lumps in the soil so it doesn't damage the root as the roots are forming. The only difference here is the seeds are much bigger and they're less susceptible to drying out, so I'm not going to do the plank method. I'm just going to give this a water whenever it starts to dry out in the surface. Parsnip seeds are a lot larger, so you can plant that a bit deeper in the soil, and they're much stronger plant when they come up. Because they've got a bigger seed, they're more vigorous when the seeds actually come up. So you can see there the seeds of the parsnip are much bigger than the carrot, very different seed. These are decent size, so I can plant these individually. I'll just pick them up with my finger, plant individual seeds. That way I can get a much better even spacing. I shouldn't need to thin these out too much. We will plant them quite close together to begin with. That way we will selectively thin them as the summer goes on. That way what will happen is we'll get an early crop, probably kind of July or August time, and we'll just every week we'll take 1 or 2 out. That'll thin them out, give the other ones more space to grow, and then we'll have some really huge ones at the end of summer. And they normally do really well in this garden because we've got nice sandy soil, and which is perfect for parsnips, so they grow nice and deep and there's nothing really inhibiting the growth. They're all the same variety, so I'll just put one label in for the variety. At the end of each row I'll put in a small willow stick just to mark off the end of the row so I know where the end of the rows are. There'll be a thin path in the middle here, runner beans, another path here, carrots, broad beans, podded peas, and then these 4 obelisks are going to be for Mons 2. So I'll give you guys an update once these are growing. I might do a weeding video or a thinning out video, but for now I'm just going to keep these well watered, check for germination, check to see if there's too many weeds, but generally leave it, just keep it well watered, and then the main bit of work next for these will be weeding, thinning, and then mulching.